Hello, everyone. Today we'll be discussing a fundamental philosophical question, and that is the question, what is philosophy? The first thing to note is that there's actually no universally agreed upon definition of what philosophy is. However, there are some good characterizations, some ways of attempting to define what it is that philosophers throughout the centuries have tried to do. And here are some of them. So historically, philosophy is the mother of the sciences. If you look at physics, linguistics, and other sciences, psychology, you will notice that the history of the development of the rise goes through philosophy. There were branches of philosophy first. Physics was natural philosophy. And at some point, it morphed enough, it changed enough, it acquired a particular kind of identity to itself that it became its own science. But it began in philosophy. It began with this general kind of pursuit of truth, and then it became its own thing. So you can think of adequately, correctly, of philosophy as the mother of the sciences, historically speaking. Etymologically, the word philosophy comes from the Greek philos, which means love, and the word sophia, which means wisdom. So historically, philosophers have been the lovers of wisdom. So philosophers want to know the truth, but not just any truth, the truth that matters, the truth that is, wisdom. So here's a good characterization of that kind of truth. So wisdom is knowledge that is worth having, or the kind of knowledge of what kind of life is worth living. So the kind of truth that philosophers historically have tried to attain is the kind of truth that makes them have a life that is worth living. And it takes wisdom to know that. In fact, that's what makes wisdom, that it enables the person who has the knowledge to have a life that matters. Here's my preferred definition of philosophy, however. It's in some sense more general, but I think it captures more of the kind of thing that philosophers do. So philosophy is a dialogue between persons aimed at truth. So look at the latter part. It is aimed at truth. Philosophers, what we do is we ask questions for the sake of trying to find answers to those questions. And look at the first part. It's a dialogue between persons. So it is something, it's an activity that takes place within the context of a community. It happens between persons. And that matters. There's an element to that. And here's a way of trying to get at that community element. To treat someone as a person is to recognize that our perspective is not more privileged or superior or something like that than their perspective. In other words, it is to treat others as equally credible authorities in matters philosophical. So here's the philosophical question: does God exist? Here's a different philosophical question: are gun rights morally justifiable? Is a good society, a just society, one which allows for people to have guns, non-governmental officials to have guns? And to be a philosopher is to ask those questions, to ask them sincerely, to want to know the correct answer to those questions, and to engage in the process of dialoguing with others so that we can figure out what the right answer is, whether God actually exists, whether there are such things as gun rights, whether a good society is the one that has citizens or respects the rights of citizens that include owning guns. In what it is to treat others as persons in the context of dialogue and trying to answer those questions is in part to listen to what they have to say. So if you believe God exists, but someone comes along and says, no, I don't think so, and then they give you a reason, what it is to treat them as a person is to listen to the reason, not to assume that the mere fact that you disagree with them somehow implies or entails that your position is better, that you have this privileged position. If there's disagreement between people, it's not yet clear who's right. And to treat someone as a person is to not just ignore them when they disagree with you, when they provide reasons against your views. So to treat them as persons is to listen to what they have to say and to take it seriously, to engage with it. That is what we're going to be doing in this class. So let's talk a little bit more about what it is to do philosophy as a dialogue between persons aimed at truth. So philosophy aims at truth. That means that philosophy is closer to a science than it is to something like literature. Some great philosophy reads like poetry. But what makes it philosophy, not just poetry, is that it tries to capture, articulate, or argue for a particular truth, a real truth, something profound, something about wisdom, something about justice, something that matters. So it should feel more like science than poetry or literature, because it aims at truth. But because it aims at truth, philosophy is also in tension with two kind of thoughts or two kind of tendencies or attitudes that are dominant in our culture. And I label those attitudes or thoughts or ideas, I call them pure perspectivalism and scientism. Philosophy has a dialogue between persons aimed at truth, is in tension with these two ideas or currents of thought in our culture. And here is a more careful articulation of what those ideas are. So pure perspectivalism is the kind of attitude that someone has when they say things like these. There are just perspectives. That something seems true to you has no bearing on how I should think about my perspective on reality. What is true to you need not be true to me. At the heart of saying those kinds of things is the idea that there's my perspective, which is inescapable from me. There's your perspective, which is inescapable from you. And there's really no intersubjectively available kind of reality or data or evidence that we can appeal to in order to figure out whose perspective is more accurate or more true or more reasonable. The thought behind pure perspectivalism is that there are just perspectives. There is no better or more accurate perspective. And that undermines philosophy or is in tension with philosophy, because philosophy wants to know the truth. Go back to the question of whether God exists. If I say, I think God exists, and you tell me, no, I don't think so, and then I give you reasons, and you give me reasons. The whole point of engaging in that dialogue, the reasonable dialogue, trying to answer the question whether God exists, is to figure out whether my perspective or your perspective is more accurate, is more reflective of reality, is more truthful, more reasonable. Pure perspectivalism denies the very enterprise. That's why it is in tension with philosophy. And here's the other kind of attitude that is dominant in our society that it's also in tension with philosophy, as I've defined it. This is scientism. And scientism is the kind of attitude that someone who says the following things has. Only what is scientifically knowable is knowable, or only what is scientifically true is true, or only what is scientifically credible or reasonable is credible or reasonable. In other words, science is the standard for truth, for rationality, or for knowledge. People that say those things typically think that philosophy is not science, and therefore they try to use science as a wedge or a weapon against engaging in philosophical dialogue. That's why it's in tension. So I told you that philosophy is in tension with pure perspectivalism. But merely to say that is not yet to give you a reason for endorsing philosophy or pure perspectivalism. So let me actually give you a reason for thinking that you should be a philosopher and not engage and not endorse pure perspectivalism. Here's an argument. So claim number one, if pure perspectivalism were true, there would be no intersubjectively available facts or evidence. There would just be perspectives, right? That's what the view says. The view says if your perspective is different from someone else's, and that's rock bottom. There's no one is more accurate, because there is no reality that is accessible to anyone that can show that your perspective is better or worse. There's just perspectives. That's it. Second claim, important claim. There are intersubjectively available facts or evidence. One is false. Therefore, one is false. Why should you think claim number two is correct? Well, here's some reasons for thinking that claim number two is correct. One reason for thinking that claim number two is correct is the following: the possibility of error. Sometimes our perspectives are mistaken or ill-informed. Think, for example, of someone who's a racist or someone who's sexist. They might think, if they're racist, they might think something like whites are superior. What it is to be right, what it is to be white is to be on the top of this hierarchy of value. And other humans, non-whites, are below that hierarchy. That's what it is to be racist. That's their perspective on reality. And here is a very plausible claim. That perspective is mistaken. Humans are equal. So it is possible that racism is false. Because it is possible that racism is false, then the perspective of racism is not the only thing that's relevant. There is a reality that is independent from our perspectives, and racism gets it wrong. That only makes sense if there's a reality independent of our perspectives, and plausibly there is. Reason number 2, the possibility of learning or growth. Experience and training lead to being more well-informed, and therefore lead to more accurate perspectives on reality. You might start looking around at the economy now during the current society, and you might try to measure it. You might try to assess in a particular way to, say, invest your money or something, and you might have a perspective on how to go about best investing your money, and that might be fine, right? Your perspective on reality is there. But if you talk to an economist, if you talk to someone who's been doing this for 30 years, who has a PhD in economics, they're going to be able to see a lot of things you won't be able to see. They're going to be able to assess the market in a much better way than you can. Or put differently, their perspective on the nature of the market is going to be significantly better than yours, more accurate, more reflective of reality. And here's the observation: your perspective can grow. You can develop, but you can take some classes in economics, and then you'll be a more experienced, well-informed assessor of the market, and so you can invest better. That's true. Perspectives on the market are not the same. Some are more better than others, and people can grow on their assessment of reality. The perspectives can become more accurate. If pure perspectivalism were true, that wouldn't be the case. That couldn't be the case, because there would be just perspectives. The fact that there's the possibility of learning and growth indicates that not all perspectives are the same. Some are better than others, more accurate than others. And third, relatedly, the existence of experts. There are scientists, there are historians, and they know stuff, right? What makes them scientists, what makes them historians, and so on, is that they have the relevant kind of expertise that makes their perspective on their subject matter better, more accurate, more reflective of reality. And that only makes sense if pure perspectivalism is false. Here's a different kind of reason. Finally, any inquiry presupposes the falsity of pure perspectivalism. To engage in an inquiry, to ask a question and try to seek an answer, is to aim at this intersubjectively available truth that escapes your mere perspective on the matter. You're not inquiring on how you think, you're inquiring on how reality is. An inquiry presupposes the falsity of pure perspectivalism. So those are some reasons for thinking that pure perspectivalism is false, and that philosophy is the way to go. Let's look at scientism. So first major claim, scientism, as stated, is either trivially true and therefore not a threat to philosophy, or it's obviously false and therefore not a threat to philosophy. So either way, there's no threat here. Let's begin with A. You can understand the word science or the enterprise of science in a broad way. And you can understand it in the way to mean something like investigation into truth or discovery of facts, or inquiry into knowledge, something like that, some very generic. Anytime you try to know something, every time you struggling to comprehend reality, you're engaging in scientific enterprise. If that's what you mean by the word science, then scientism as defined is actually true. Like, all truth can be attained via investigating truth, right? That's a truism. But that would be trivially true, and therefore not a threat to, say, philosophy, that kind of thing we'll be doing in this class. Because by this definition, philosophy would be a kind of science, as many people have thought. So A is not, understanding scientism via A is not a threat to philosophy. People that say the kind of scientism thing, though, they don't mean A. They typically mean B. So science can be narrowly construed or understood to mean something like justifying theories by empirically verifiable, multiply repeatable experiments, something that sounds very modern science. And people that say the scientism thing typically mean that. It is the much more narrowly construed way of going about trying to attain the truth that they're promoting as the way to attain the truth, and then they're saying anything that is not that is false, is unjustifiable, and so on. So if that's what they mean, if that's what the scientists, the proponent of scientism means, here's the reply. That's an obviously false claim. And here's why you should think that it's not a false claim. Here's support for B. Support for thinking that understanding science narrowly construed is fine, but thinking that nothing outside of that narrow construal of science is knowable is some mistake. So first reason for thinking that scientism narrowly construed is false. Scientism is itself not scientifically justified or established by this very narrow conception of science. Put differently, the claim only that which is justified by empirically verifiable, multiply repeatable experiments is justifiable. That claim is itself not empirically verifiable or multiply repeatable. So it does not pass its own standard for truth or rationality. But differently, by its own standard, it is not reasonable or credible or knowable to be someone who endorses scientism. Science is great, but scientism is not, says this objection. Scientism is self-undermining. It claims of itself that it's unreasonable, unknowable. So that's pretty serious, but here are a couple of more reasons for thinking scientism narrowly construed is false. Reason number 2, we do know many more things than what the narrow conception of science allows. Think, for example, of historical knowledge. Think of introspective knowledge, first-person perspective knowledge, moral knowledge. So here's a claim. Obama became the first African-American president in 2008. That is true. I know that. A lot of you do, right? And yet it is not the kind of thing that is empirically verifiable via multiply repeatable experiments. Why? Because it's part of the past. The past is inaccessible to us. We cannot do another experiment. We can look at documents, but that's a different kind of thing. It is the kind of thing that historians do. Is not the kind of thing that was described narrowly before. And yet historians know stuff. We know stuff, right? That falls outside of the definition of scientism. Therefore, scientism is false. And misjudges what we know. Third, it seems that scientism rests on a simple mistake. The science, again, narrowly construed, has established much, and it has. We should be very happy about that. We should all care about that and try to learn as much science as we can. But anyway, that fact that the science has established much does not entail that things outside of that narrow conception of science cannot also be known or established as well. So here's some kind of example to illustrate the claim. Suppose you have a very wonderful metal detector. You've used it in the past, and every single time you go out, go about your yard or go into the sand or something, every single time when there's a metal there, it detects it. Right? It's very good at detecting metal, and you're very proud of your metal detector. You say, my metal detector detects anything that is metal that is there. And one time I tell you, oh, there's a piece of wood underneath a pile of dirt. And then you take your metal detector and you go over on top of the pile of dirt, and it doesn't beep, it doesn't find anything. And you come to me and tell me, oh, you were mistaken, there's nothing underneath the pile of dirt. I just used my metal detector and it didn't detect anything. Here's what I would justifiably say in reply. Well, your metal detector is wonderful, it detects metal, so that's great. But that's not what I said. I was talking about wood, and your metal detector is just not the way of going about finding wood. The fact that it is so successful at what it does, namely finding metal, detecting metal, has no implications for whether or not other things are there, and other methods for finding other things are also justifiable and reliable. You're just making a simple mistake, a fallacious move in your reasoning. That your metal detector works so well does not entail that things outside of it cannot be known or detected. And it seems that the scientist, the person endorsing scientism is making the same kind of mistake. Just because science narrowly construed has shown a lot, which it has, does not mean that things outside of that are unknowable or unjustifiable or incredible. It doesn't show that. That's just a simple mistake. Okay, let's stop here. Those are some reasons for thinking that scientism is false, and some reasons for thinking that pure perspectivalism is false, and therefore for thinking that that philosophy understood as dialogue between persons aimed at truth is a perfectly legitimate way of going about in the kind of thing we'll be doing in this class. Until next time, see ya.